Okay, so we are pressing right along with our core components of effective legal drafting. We've dealt with purpose and we've dealt with audience. So what are we going to deal with today? Today, we're going to deal with tone. And tone flows naturally on from audience and purpose because your tone for any written communication is going to be determined by those things. Naturally, it will be somewhat determined by the nature of what you're writing. So a legal submission or a pleading will have a different tone to a letter of advice, which will have a different tone to a letter to another party, which will have a different tone to the other things, and so on and so forth. So for legal writing to be effective, you need to strike the right tone. And in my experience, this is actually one of the hardest things for young lawyers to develop. And I accept that I have driven some people crazy so far as tone is concerned, and here is why. There is no consistent answer so far as tone is concerned. What do I mean? There is a formality associated with writing that some people adopt, which might be fine to write to person A, but might be overly formal for person B. Maybe person B will feel affronted by such formal language, whereas person A expects the formal language. There are some people who communicate very authentically and very honestly and very freely, but they are very casual. And casual communication can be great for creating confidence with a client, in particular with, say, a personal client or a private client matter, or just creating that one-on-one relationship. However, if you adopt a casual tone in your communication to a judge's associate, or if you adopt a casual tone in your communication, perhaps with another party, and as a result, you don't apply the rigor necessary to develop an effective piece of writing, then you're going to come a cropper. So that is why tone is a very difficult and, again, subjective element. The problem that I find happens is that most young lawyers have a tendency to really go way down the formal end of the spectrum because of the way they've been trained. And I've spoken already about how university has ill-equipped you to prepare real-world legal writing, and this is one of the reasons why. It's because as a legal practitioner, you're going to need to be receptive to what is an appropriate tone for any particular piece of correspondence and is going to vary widely. So, what does this mean in practice? It means in practice that, generally speaking, the communications I get from young lawyers have a tendency to be overly formal. So this might be, for example, I've asked someone to write a letter to a new potential client, someone who I've had a telephone call with, or we've had a brief meeting with, and we're writing back to them. I might get an email, say, from the young lawyer who's written this letter back to them, and it might say something like this. Dear Mrs. Smith, we confirm that you provided us with instructions recently to do X, Y, and Z. Enclosed is our formal documentation, which we would like you to read. Full stop. Please then sign and return the documents by ordinary mail. Full stop. New paragraph. Now, I'm not going to keep going with that example. We're going to look at that sort of thing later. But already you can feel that there is not really a personal connection there. This isn't the tone of a letter that you would necessarily write to someone you hadn't met. It reads like a form letter, like a precedent. It reads like someone has written it in a relationship vacuum. And really, tone is about relationship. Tone is about both understanding the nature of the relationship you have and taking the opportunity to extend that relationship and build trust. Because if you show a little bit of authenticity in your communication, in your written communication, then you're going to be able to extend that trust relationship even more and build your client relationship by breaking down some barriers. But if you talk in one way and email in another way and write in another way, that can start to feel a little bit disjointed. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule, and this is why tone is such a confusing issue. You might have a very good personal relationship, say, with a professional accountant, and they might ask you to do an advice on something. Now, you might be able to deliver the advice like this. Hey, Joe, you asked me to check into that thing for you. The answer is no. Have a good one. See you on the weekend. And that would be a correct legal response. But it might not be sensitive to the fact that Joe needs to place your legal advice on his file. And if Joe leaves that firm and someone reviews it in the future, they're not going to be very happy with the casual nature of it. So you need to be appreciative then of the purpose of the letter. We've already spoken about that. What is the purpose of the letter? Does Joe just want the answer? Or is in fact the purpose bigger than that? And so you might find that you have a good, close, personal, chatty relationship with people and communicate freely with them, but there is times when you will write a formal piece of correspondence for them to put on their files and for them to then refer to later if they need to. That said, I do find that people have a tendency to go formal more often than they need to. And this is because they're concerned about being overly familiar with people, and I understand that. But with the prevalence of email, communications have become faster, and in a sense, professional is probably a little bit further down than it used to be. You can still write a very polite and professional letter while not necessarily being overly formal. For example, Mrs. Smith, who came into our office the other day. Dear Glenys, thanks for coming in. It was lovely to meet you. I've enclosed our formal documents. Could you please look at them and sign them and send them back? If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call me. Regards, Chris. Do you see that that still achieves its purpose, but it is just a little bit more personal? It is a little bit more friendly, it's a little bit more open. The danger of formality is that it has a tendency to be unfriendly and it has a tendency to be cold. Sometimes formality is called for. If you're writing a formal letter of demand, if you are requesting changes to a contract, then there's no need to necessarily get too far down the tone thing. You have a very factual set of changes you need to do. You have a very factual job to do. You don't necessarily need to worry too much about the tone. But really, if you're struggling with this concept so far, think about tone in this particular way. What do you want the person to feel when they're reading your thing? So you know who your audience is, you know what your purpose is. What do you want them to feel like when they're reading it? Do you want them to feel that you are chatty and friendly and authentic and open? Do you want them to feel that you are professional and expert and sort of standoffish like this, like there's a barrier between you? Are you looking to appear very knowledgeable? Are you looking to appear in some other way? What do you want them to feel about you through this method of communication, and what are you doing? Because there are times where you may strategically change your tone or utilize a different tone in order to achieve a different outcome. Perhaps you want to hit a few trigger points. Perhaps you do want someone to feel a little bit jarred by correspondence, by the tone of your correspondence. And I'm sure you've experienced this in your personal life. People might send you something with a particular tone and you go, oh, hang on, what's up here? Thought we were friends yesterday and now something's gone horribly wrong. And that is how tone works. It's an emotional response. The words may stay exactly the same, but the nature, the words won't stay exactly the same, but the layout, the setting, just some changes to the words you use, but not to the substance of what you're saying. These things are going to be very subtle, but a few changes can make a dramatic difference to the way a letter sounds, as we saw in that example before. And you're going to see in the practical examples in a later module. But for now, consider the tone. What sort of tone are you striking in your correspondence? Have you even stopped to consider, or do you just go? And again, step back. Who is your audience? What is the purpose of the letter? And how do you want them to feel about you when they read it? It's a very difficult question to answer, but it's one that's worth considering. That's the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.